Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're talking about what has become a very awkward situation with the Milwaukee Bucks botched sign and trade acquisition of Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Sacramento Kings. This is a trade that broke pretty much, 12 hours after trades were actually able to be made. It was in the same night that the Bucks traded for Jrue Holiday. Not long after, like 45 minutes later, it was reported they were also going to be acquiring Bogdanovic. That trade is no longer a thing, and it's not going to happen. They're not going to be able to figure it out. Some of the assets that were going to be involved in that trade have already been moved, and it is a really, really strange situation. We're going to be breaking down what this means from each side's perspective, and then also, of course, what the league could potentially be doing is they are investigating this trade itself. We're going to be talking about all those things in today's video. But quickly, before we get started, typical stuff. If you enjoy content like this, I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA offseason. It's a great place to be. You should consider subscribing. We're almost at 100K. We are right there. So we're on the push towards that number. You can also leave a like rating on the video. Helps me out a ton. And you can hang out with me at the various socials at the bottom of the screen, including twitch.tv/spolo_TD, where I stream 5 times per week. And that includes a stream this evening during the start of NBA free agency. I've done this a couple years in a row. You can find me at twitch.tv/spolo_TD, as I said. This evening, I'll be streaming during the heart of the beginning of NBA free agency. It would be awesome to see you guys there. You guys crushed it during the draft stream, and I look forward to seeing you guys. With those things said, let's go ahead and get into it. So, we all know kind of the initial situation here, right? The Bucks went on this, trade spree trying to add players to their roster in the hopes that Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to sign his Supermax extension as free agency starts tonight and then into the next couple of days. They're hoping that he will be signing that Supermax. And in an effort to convince him, they were bringing in players that fit really well on this roster. At first, they paid a massive price to bring in Jrue Holiday. And then not long after that, as I mentioned, they brought in Bogdan Bogdanovic in exchange for DJ Wilson, Ersan Ilyasova, and Donte DiVincenzo, who was the main part of that trade. Now, the interesting part about that is that story broke pretty much at midnight Eastern time on Monday going into Tuesday. Free agency doesn't start for another 6.5 hours here on the East Coast. So the fact that it was a sign and trade that was agreed to is at least a little bit questionable, right? Because you're not supposed to be talking to free agents right now. Now, we all know that they have agreed to stuff, and there will be stuff, I'm sure, coming out free agency-wise at 5 and 4:30 Eastern time here in advance of when free agency actually starts, right? We saw that last year. We knew that Kevin Durant was going to be a Brooklyn Net an hour and a half before free agency was actually supposed to start. So everybody knows that these teams are talking to each other before free agency starts. But what the problem here is that it was made so public literally 5 days in advance. And there's no way that they could have made this trade and felt confident making it had they not spoken to Bogdanovic prior to about his willingness to sign in Milwaukee. However, that's also kind of where the weirdness comes in here, because it turns out Bogdanovic didn't want to go to Milwaukee, didn't want to be with the Bucks, didn't want to be the fourth option, and wanted to be a free agent, albeit a restricted one, and he liked his chances better as a restricted free agent rather than in this sign and trade scenario going to Milwaukee, whether it was a money issue, whether it was a role issue, whether he just didn't want to live in Milwaukee, what have you. So there's obviously a ton of issues here with this trade specifically. Now, in terms of what's going to happen with the league investigation, I can't imagine that it's going to be all that big of a deal. It kind of just seems like they're covering themselves here by looking into what is such an egregious breaking of the rules because it was made public. But the NBA has to know that these teams and these players and these agents are talking back and forth well in advance of free agency. There's no way that they wouldn't be, considering that we're going to see so many contracts signed as soon as 6 o'clock hits tonight. So it would be odd to me if the NBA made an example out of Milwaukee here, given that this is something that we know about, right? We know tampering is a thing. And so it would be kind of strange if they, really put the hammer down on the Bucks. But maybe they do. Maybe there's a fine. Maybe there's some draft pick issues here. That would be not only losing, the player in the trade, but then losing a potential draft pick as well as a result of just botching this whole situation would be unfortunate for Milwaukee. Now, the other part of this is it's not like when free agency opens, they can be like, oh, we figured out a new contract. We're going to do a sign and trade for Bogdanovic now, because the Bucks waived Ersan Ilyasova because there was a deadline date in which they could waive his contract and not have to pay him his $7 million that would have been guaranteed. They only ended up paying him $1 or $2 million out of that $7 million, lower their salary cap, things like that. So they went ahead and waived him, and he was part of the initial deal to make the salaries match for Bogdanovic. So the initial structure of that trade isn't even possible anymore, which again makes it very awkward because Donte DiVincenzo knows that the Milwaukee Bucks wanted to trade him away for Bogdan Bogdanovic. It was all over Twitter. It's impossible that he doesn't know. So they almost are in a position where they have to trade him now, because he's not going to report back to the team and be like, oh guys, it's fine. You guys wanted to trade me, but now I'm back. Now I'm good to go. Like, that's going to be an awkward situation. And so in my opinion, it's almost like they've really lowered the value of the asset DiVincenzo, because everybody knows that they're going to be looking to trade him for something, for anything. And ideally it would have been Bogdanovic, but that just, in my opinion, isn't going to happen anymore with the salary structure. Now, maybe they still will turn around and on Friday, today, be like, oh, we figured out a new contract. Let's bring in Bogdanovic. But I don't know that that's going to be the case. More than likely, what's going to end up happening is Bogdanovic will be signed and traded, just not to Milwaukee. And Milwaukee will have to figure out what they want to do with DiVincenzo and DJ Wilson, because those two guys know that they were actually traded in a trade that just wasn't allowed to go through. So for Bogdanovic's free agency moving forward here, Sacramento, I'm sure, is going to shop him as well as Buddy Hield. It makes me think that there are sign and trade options out there for Bogdanovic. The fact that he wanted to go back into restricted free agency, because as we've talked about multiple times, this isn't a free agency class that has a lot of teams with a lot of cap space. And so Bogdanovic is looking for a deal in the $10 to $15+ million range. He's more than likely going to be looking at a team that is currently over the salary cap that will be making a sign and trade with Sacramento and sending assets back. Unless he's going to be going somewhere like Detroit or Charlotte or Atlanta that has a significant amount of cap space, it seems like a sign and trade is still in the works here for Bogdanovic, just not to Milwaukee. So for Sacramento, I still think it's a little bit odd that they were looking to move Bogdanovic in the first place, because it seemed like he was a guy that they wanted to retain and they would rather trade Buddy Hield, because Hield seems unhappy, but maybe Bogdanovic seems unhappy as well, and maybe they'll trade both of them and kind of go from there. I don't have a pulse at all on what's going to happen there in Sacramento, because what I thought was happening turned out not to happen as soon as that Bucks Bogdanovic trade news broke. So I really have no idea what they're going to do. For Milwaukee, I'm still hopeful, despite the Bogdanovic thing. As cool as it would have been for him to be in Milwaukee, I thought that was an awesome fit. I'm still confident that they're going to be able to sign Giannis Antetokounmpo to the Supermax within the next week to 2 weeks. The deadline is actually, I want to say, the 15th of December, a little bit less than a month from now. But I would imagine, and I made a video really confident about this the other day, that Giannis is going to recognize that this is a really good opportunity. The Jrue Holiday trade shows that this team is committed to winning, and that he should be re-signing that Supermax worth $230 million, by the way, over the span of 5 years. So at the end of the day, for the Bucks, in terms of their pursuit of retaining Giannis, this shouldn't be a huge difference maker. And I would be shocked if they go into next year with Donte DiVincenzo still on the roster. And there probably will be another trade made here, even if it's just to save face and get DiVincenzo somewhere else and get somebody back in return that can help this roster. But this is an odd and an awkward situation. I can't really recall something like this where, a trade went from completed basically to all the assets going back to the teams. The only times that I can really remember this happening related to players failing their physicals rather than a financial thing where it's like a sign and trade or a free agency situation, because I'm positive there have been times when a player was traded and then the trade was vetoed or reversed back because of the failed physical. And then the other thing that comes to mind is when the Celtics were trying to trade the Cavs were trying to trade Kyrie to the Celtics, and the Isaiah Thomas physical medical stuff didn't go well. They had to throw in like an extra second-round pick or something like that. And that trade almost got reversed, but it ended up going through. I can't remember a trade that was reported publicly, everybody knew was happening, and then it got reversed, all because a team tried to negotiate with a player before free agency had actually started. And it's an unfortunate situation, because in all likelihood, things like this with sign and trades have happened in the past. They just weren't leaked and they weren't made public. And if like the Woj tweet or the Shams tweet never went out, maybe this whole situation would have been different, because people wouldn't have known. Maybe the league wouldn't have known. They kind of keep it under wraps and then things go through on Friday. Or maybe they just didn't have the conversation with Bogdanovic and they were just like, hey, we'll acquire him. We'll figure out the contract stuff once Friday rolls around, and then he catches wind of the whole situation and is like, I don't really want to be a Milwaukee Buck. And that ruins the whole thing. I don't know, but regardless, strange things happening there between the Bucks and Kings, and we'll keep an eye on what's going to happen with both of those teams moving forward. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.